Hey guys, and welcome back to Living the Dream. Today's guest, over 300 football appearances in the Premier League. He played for clubs like Tottenham Hotspur and Norwich and Burnley. He made 40 caps for Northern Ireland. He's now retired and he's gone in to being an author and now keynote speaker and the first Premier League football player ever to have a master's in sports psychology. His name is Paul McVeigh. And now let's go and talk to him. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Living the Dream. And I've got a friend of mine, Paul McVeigh, on the line. How are you, Paul?
Embarrassingly well, Liam. How are you doing?
I'm very good. I haven't seen you for years.
I know. It's been a long time, and it's amazing the kind of the challenges, the twists and turns that life throws at us, doesn't it? And but I think hopefully we're all in a good place.
Yeah, fantastic. You looking well as well. You've been training over lockdown?
I've been doing a lot of training. I wanted to get that six pack back again. I'd had it for probably 15 years during the playing days, and then for the last 10 years it kind of went a bit missing. So I thought I need to get this back, and lockdown was just a great opportunity where you're going to be eating at home, you're not going to be on the move and traveling, which is a lot of what I do with my work these days. And I thought this is a great opportunity, and took about 10 kilos off during lockdown. So wow. Quite a lot, but the other side of that is, why did I have an extra 10 kilos in the first place?
Paul, let's get straight into it. Okay, so you had a very, very good career as a football player. 20 years, I think you was a professional football player, and you came through the Spurs Academy. You played for clubs like Burnley and Norwich City. Let's go back to you as a child. Let's go back to you as a young boy growing up in Belfast. What was that like?
I suppose the only way I can describe it is normal. It was really normal growing up that, you'd be going to school every day, you're coming back and playing football in the street, you're just, messing about with your mates who were your neighbours, you were throwing things at your neighbour's window and running away before they caught you. But that was probably one side of the story. I suppose the other side was growing up in a war zone, civil unrest, bombs going off every day, tanks driving down your street, soldiers walking past you and pointing their rifles in your face, your family emigrating to America because there's not a lot of jobs for you, and people getting shot quite a lot, and not realizing that this wasn't normal. And it was only when I went off the leafy suburb of Bush Hill Park in Enfield, North London, that I realized that walking down the street, there were no bombs going off, there were no tanks, there were no soldiers. And it was only that realization once I got to London in 1994 at 16 that what I grew up in was effectively a war zone.
I mean, as a young boy, having all that around you and still then having the drive to be a professional football player, I mean, that takes an incredible amount of effort. And there's so many other ways you could have gone, surely, but, well done you.
Well, I think this is interesting because just to jump forward, to where we're at now in 2020, I feel that like I'm at a stage of having nearly 20 years in professional football, 10 years as a kind of global keynote speaker, and now working across high performance with companies across the world. And I feel that it's not really about the work that I'm doing now, and it's more about how can I help people who grew up in similar places to me. Because the only reason why I kind of get plucked out of this war zone was because of my football. Now, that is such a lottery because there were so many people who grew up in my street, in my area and community that didn't have the football, didn't have the opportunities that I had, and then ended up, as you say, getting involved in, whether it was drugs or, gangs or other things that were going on in Belfast in the 80s and 90s. And so I do feel really passionate about that I'm now at a stage where I want to be helping people who are living in conflict zones around the world. And that could be whether it's in Syria, Mexico City, but it could also be Birmingham or Manchester, because people are growing up and they have these daily choices of what they get involved in, but are also getting heavily influenced by the people around them.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to touching on that in a second. Before we do, let's talk about your biggest career highlight. What would you say was your most memorable event or occasion as a professional football player?
Oh, that's not that I had the most successful career, because I won a couple of league titles, and I played a few times for my country, Northern Ireland. But I suppose if there was one moment, it's probably quite ironic that it was losing the playoff final at the Millennium Stadium in front of 75,000 people, because it was the end of my first season where I'd fully established myself at Norwich. Had played 40 odd games, would come through the playoffs, and even just the emotional roller coaster of the playoffs of, beating Wolves in the semis and then getting to the final against Birmingham and realising that this is the biggest day of your life. I personally felt I had a great game. I loved it, really enjoyed it, but we lost on penalties. But even though we lost and the outcome wasn't what I wanted, the whole process and experience of just establishing myself in the team, realising this was the platform that I was going to have for my career, and walking around that pitch with my manager, Nigel Worthing at the time, seeing 75,000 people, 37,500 of them absolutely delirious and delighted because they're going to the Premier League, and all the Norwich fans completely devastated. And I was just walking around with a smile on my face going, what a ride. What an occasion, what an experience. And so even though we lost that, it was probably still one of the best days of my life.
Incredible stadium, Millennium Stadium. I mean, some people might not know, but I was born in Cardiff, and I played at Millennium Stadium a few times when I played for Wales as a young lad many moons ago. So look, you retired, and lots of footballers go into coaching. Lots of footballers, pick up a new job, whatever that may be. You are a published author. You are a keynote speaker. And I read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are the first ex-Premiership football player to have a sports master's in psychology.
Yes, yeah. So that's really, I suppose it's a way of trying to separate yourself. Like you said, loads of players have come through the footballing world, have got off and done all sorts of amazing things, or not. And for me, it was a case of, what can I do that would separate myself from the Alan Shearers or the Ryan Giggs or the David Beckhams? And of course, I can't compete with them on a footballing sense. But because I love this world of psychology and that whole mental performance, and I wanted to pass and share that on to people, whether it's in the sporting world or in the corporate world, I thought, well, going down this keynote speaking route, there was nobody else doing it. There were no other people from my background that become keynote speakers. And I thought, well, that's a great USP straight away. But after I was doing it for a few years, I realised that I was still kind of using the experience and credibility from my playing days. And so went off and did my master's in sports psychology, as you said. And again, just to try and give me that extra credibility of understanding probably both ends of that dichotomy of league performance. Because if you have, just to play at the Premier League level, as you just mentioned, takes a huge amount of effort, and that's an achievement in itself. But then the study, what takes to understand the theoretical and academic concepts of it, again, just gives me both sides of that performance spectrum, and that's why I really enjoyed doing that.
So what's your end goal with this now then? So you tell me the journey you've been on with this keynote speaking. I've seen you spoke around the world. How is the message getting across to people at the moment?
So it started off in 2010. I went off to America and learned how to become a keynote speaker from a keynote speaker in America who was charging $10,000 an hour. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. I wouldn't mind a little bit of that. So I went off to Tampa, Florida, learned from him. He was my mentor. I came back and I just was out delivering sessions to companies like Aviva, on leadership, or Thornton on resilience, or PwC on change, or whatever the topic was that they wanted to speak to me or wanted me to speak to them about. But it was also the progression of me as a speaker, because of course my first time doing it, I was terrible.
Really?
Brutal. Like, it was so bad. And actually, because of the person I am and the way I do things, I record all my sessions because I want to analyze it. So whenever I did my first session which was for Aviva, 150 of their senior staff on leadership. When I look back at that, and I look back at it about 6 months ago, I was stuttering, I was hesitating, these little rosy red cheeks were going bright red. It was terrible. But then at the end of it, the cameraman who I had with me at the time, he had the wherewithal to go and get testimonials from the delegates. And when I saw what they were saying, they were like, oh, it was really inspirational. He thought he was so good. And I love this line, the way he said that. And I just thought, how could they possibly think that about me? But of course, it's me being critical of looking back at myself 10 years later. So it's just that natural progression of how do you improve? How do you get better? How do you become an expert in your field? Well, of course, I know that from my footballing background, how to do that. And it's just purely from the hard work, the analysis, feedback, and improving on what you can do better. And that continual loop's happened for the last 10, 12 years.
So the training program you have now, is that Best that I see behind you? Well, tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose I realised that having done this for quite a while, that there were so many people who could do it and just didn't know where to start with it. And instead of going off to America like I did 10 years ago, myself and business partner Leon Lloyd, who played rugby for Leicester Tigers for 14 years, we thought, well, we're both keynote speakers. We both have quite a broad reach of football and rugby. Why don't we start sharing this? And so we're really fortunate. We just delivered our last course there, and we had people from sporting background, the corporate world. So like we had a CEO who'd taken his company from 5 million to 100 million turnover, a girl from the media who's a TV presenter. We had someone who was in the Red Arrows. So it's quite a broad mix, and being able to bring all of these people together who have already been, incredibly high achievers in their own field. And then they come into our program, learn how to do it, and then share that with the corporate audience.
What makes a good keynote speaker?
That's a really good question. The big part of it is relatable. That's, I think for me, is the hardest part. Because, if you just say you had a World Cup winner in whatever sport or Olympic champion, they could come in as a keynote speaker into a company and they could tell you about winning the gold or winning that World Cup or whatever it was. But if they're just saying, look at me, this is what I did, I'm great, kind of defeats the purpose. You might come away and go, that's really nice for you, Steve Redgrave, because you've won 5 gold medals. But actually it's, how does that relate to the individual in the audience? And that's the challenge, especially if someone from a sporting background, if they go in and talk about sport the whole time. Well, if I'm going in as a former footballer, and let's just say there's some guy who works in HR who's 52, doesn't know what the Champions League is, has no idea or cares about the Premier League, well, he's not going to get anything from my keynote if all I talk about is football, which is why it has to be relatable. I feel it has to be inspirational, but also it has to give them something that they can take away so that they can improve, be better, have more, do more, be more in their lives.
It's always fascinating me, keynote speakers, because you've got, obviously in the lockdown period, I've taken on the podcast and obviously Posh Cockney TV. And there's something natural about myself that I love doing it. For some people that want to get into it, they might not be very comfortable with a microphone or a camera in their face. So how do you change their mindset? What's the biggest thing that you hone in on? Is it, the relatable thing's great. And I also think that people that talk about failure and then how they come back from that is a big point. And that would be something that I would really, be engaged with as somebody in the audience.
Well, that's the resilience piece, really, isn't it? It's because the relatable could be just telling them that actually, even though I have achieved the World Cup winners medal or I have got an Olympic gold, let me take you through all these experiences of all the times when that wasn't the case. And so part of it is really being able to share your story, because that's all it is. It's storytelling. And that's just such a fabric of our society and as humans in our DNA. As a storyteller, if you engage people, and of course we know what a good story entails, it needs a start, middle and end. It needs a kind of protagonist. It needs the kind of tragedy. It needs a twist. It needs some humor. It needs to take people on this roller coaster of where you're going. So all of these aspects are a great starting point, but then of course they need to be weaved in with business lessons. They need to be able to help the company, not just be able to share a story about a sporting moment or a moment of tragedy. So it's taken all of that knowledge, all of that kind of insight, and being able to break it down so that you can then deliver it in a way that's actually, it's a bit of a performance as well. Because if you go out and deliver it and you're just like that the whole time, there's no light and shade, there's nothing to really get people off their seats, there's no dramatic pause. It's like, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
And all of that, it's all part of the process. But that's really, a long-term process. But one of the big things that did help me was actually working in the media. Because when you're working in the media and you're working for Sky Sports and suddenly the light goes red and you're live going out to the nation, to deliver your words in a really succinct, clear, precise manner is crucial, because you don't have the second, third, fourth takes. And it's the same when you're on stage. To be able to do that same process in front of a live audience is probably harder, because in a studio, there's only 3 or 4 people and a couple of crew. But actually, when you're in front of an audience, it's probably why most people are terrified and would rather, hold snakes or die than stand up and speak in front of a public audience.
Well, I think many people that are watching this right now, I think it's certainly something that people should try. How would they get hold of you, Paul, and maybe take on your training program?
Yeah, so it's definitely the best way is to go through social media. They can get me on Twitter, Paul McVeigh 77, or on Instagram, same Paul McVeigh 77, or just on LinkedIn. It's funny how the LinkedIn is probably where I get most of my business, because it is obviously the business community, people who want to improve and learn how to get better in especially that kind of higher achievers. Whenever they're going in, they've gone like, right, this is what I've done in my life. How can I now share that in a way that's going to be meaningful and actually impactful for them? Because that's the biggest thing. It's so many people have great stories. Like, you've got a great story, but then how do you share that with an audience that will actually help them in their lives is the number one part of it.
Well, we'll share all your social media handles in your email after. But my last question to you is, what do you prefer, being a football player or what you're doing right now?
That's a tough question, isn't it? That's a very tough question. Listen, I love the football. I absolutely have adored it, and I always will love it. I suppose because it was always part of my life, it never really seemed like it was ever any different. It's just so ingrained in who I am. Because I started the keynote speaking later in life, because I was terrible when I started it, and because I'm not terrible now, I think it's the keynote speaking that I love, because it feels like I'm actually impacting more people rather than just entertaining people on a Saturday.
I love that. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And when you're back from Belfast, let's catch up, eh?
Love to, Liam. Thanks very much for having me, friend.
Thanks, mate. Speak soon.